Hey everybody, it's Rob here. So should Blizzard nerf the Barbarian even more? Barbarian sure has a lot of powerful builds, especially some on the PTR, such as Flay, but we have already gotten quite some nerfs. The Bash Temper has been divided by 5. We have seen the Hemorrhage and also the Blood Rage before being kept. We have the Rumble Glyph kept at 1.3. We have the Thorns Bar basically being kind of nerfed completely out of the matter. And there are still a lot of voices in the opinions about nerfing barbs. There's been interviews by Blizzard where they basically stated they are looking to bring classes, more up to the barb level. But yeah, there's definitely still some problems on the barb, and I think a good summary here on the topic here from wudijo. So let's listen in here. I'm going to link the video in the description, and I'll let you know my opinion and hear his opinion on the barb changes. So let's go.
One big problem that barbs have is Perma Immortality that has not been addressed to my surprise. So Martial Vigor and Guttural Yell can be tempered up to...
This is also like a very niche state. Like you need like perfect gear, and even then it doesn't really matter all too much, because you can still die like from normal monsters, and here you can still die if you don't have shouts. So it's not really like immortality. But in PvP, it becomes a problem, yes?
You get 25 ranks and you get perma 100% damage reduction with Martial Vigor or after shouting with this one. In general, this whole Barbarian Protection recipe that gives you also, I think, defensive stance, which is not that problematic, but also imposing presence that gives you ridiculous amounts of lives. I think that should just be deleted, honestly. Barbs are tanky boys by default. They don't need this temper, and it just leads to these problems. And unless they do some kind of special rules or mega nerf those passives, which would be kind of weird as well, because they would nerf the passive because the temper exists. But what about the builds that don't run the temper? Like,
I think this is like such a niche problem. Like I've encountered like 1 or 2 people that even did this, because you need like perfect gear for this to work. And then you're still not immortal. You can still die from normal monsters and stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't make more sense. So I think just delete the entire thing. And then the problem is solved. Barbarians are a bit more balanced, and here we go. So this is my 2 cents on that topic. Then we have Gushing Wounds. So that's my
and he's just like barb nerves, barb nerves, barb nerves. Let's go.
Favorite thing to talk about for the barbs. A lot of people say, oh, barbs have 4 weapons. Of course, they're OP. While it does kind of contribute, I think that's mostly a result of the bad balancing here.
Nerf the Barbarian!
And not so much that barbs have 4 weapons. I think it would be not that hard to balance out barbs to be, more fairly performant, I guess, in the end game. It is just kind of like a natural, synergy that barbs have with good gear, I guess, because they have more slots. So they have more aspects, so they have more stats. You can masterwork more stuff. So there's like a longer and like more...
Again, like bring up the other classes to Barbarian level. That's what they already said. Nerf barb.
Steep progression curve basically for the late game. The thing is that there is Gushing Wounds, which is the real problem when it comes to barbs in Season 4 right now. Now, of course, there's like some other builds that don't actually run it, like Bash. Bash is getting an 80% nerf though, very rightful.
Mech is also... I mean, the Necros are eating bad this season. Like, I can understand Macro Bio Boy, but I think they just need to like revert the nerfs to the Necro rather than nerfing the barb. Like, it's just not fun. Like, the Necro, I feel, was finally in a good spot with the pets, and now they nerf it. So I can understand like where they're coming from. I just don't think nerfing barb is the solution there. Like, just don't nerf the Necro as much. And Rogue is looking like very strong anyways.
Fully so, but Gushing Wounds is actually a real issue because it's a key...
Yeah, and Hemo is already kept, right? So, I mean, I really hope the solution is not kept Gushing Wounds, man. Again, I have a video coming out about this. I don't like caps in Diablo, man. Like, caps to me is like capping the fun. They kept Thunderstruck, they kept Hemorrhage, they kept the Blood Rage, they kept the Burning Passive on Sorc, they kept the cooldown, they kept the movement speed, they kept. They kept the armor, and it's like hard caps. I don't like it.
Also, that gives you a damage modifier of up to something like 5,000% damage or so. If you scale up a lot of crit chance, a lot of crit damage, then this is like something what you expect, something like a times 30 to times 50 or so damage buff. And the thing is that most other...
Yeah, but this is like with like perfect gear.
Keepers in the game give you something like a 30% maybe 50%, maybe 100% damage
fun.
buff. So Gushing Wounds is literally like 50 to 100 times stronger.
Well, on the PTR, we didn't even play Gushing Wounds in the top build. We played Unconstrained because Gushing Wounds, like on the PTR, is nerfed already like crazy. With double dipping being fixed and with hemorrhage being kept. So bleed builds are already losing quite some stonks. And we had no viable bleed builds pretty much up until season 4, right? Like there was not... Gushing Wounds was just broken like for a year, and now they finally fixed it. So this is like the first season, season 4, where we actually play a bleed build.
And other key passes in the game. So that is like a really big reason why buffs are so powerful right now with Flay, with like the Whirlwind, bleed stuff, with Tyrio's Might, and these kind of things. There's also
Flay just like keeps getting buffs, that's why it's powerful. Flay has just gotten the ×4 blade and has not gotten the nerf.
the problem that you have Berserk Ripping aspect, which allows you to convert any flat damage effect into a bleed and then scale it off Gushing Wounds. And this means that basically everything that is like Tyrio's Might, Rakanov Boots, Holy Bolts Elixir, we've seen that.
Dude, Rakanov Boots with bleed is shit, at least for my testing. Like, it didn't really do much.
Basically exclusively a Barb item for the entire Season 4, outside of the buggy Necro stuff with the minions. This stuff only works well.
Well, it's a good Sorc item, it gives cooldown.
For the Barbs, especially if you play Bleed and Gushing Wounds. So this can never be good for anything that's not a Bleed Barb, and I think that's problematic. That limits design space massively. So I think Gushing Wounds needs a cap, it needs a massive nerf or something like that.
Hashtag
and
nerf cap
Berserk
Barb.
Ripping needs to be changed to work similar to Sword Expertise. Sword Expertise has almost the same wording as Berserk Ripping aspect, and it does not apply all these item effects. It does not.
Yeah, but Sword Expertise is like bugged like crazy because it doesn't even work with the basic stuff that you'd expect it to work. Like if you go in game and you read this thing, it doesn't even talk about like Gushing Wounds, not Gushing Wounds, Berserk Ripping. He's comparing it to that. It talks about the base of the damage, right? But the two-handed sword mastery doesn't even talk about any base. Yet it still doesn't even work. Like the way I'm understanding this and the way it's also written in the game, unless my English is literally this bad, it literally just says 20% of direct damage you deal is inflicted as bleed damage over 5 seconds. Has nothing to do with like a base damage, so this should work with crits, this should work with your twisters, this should work with turrets. Has nothing to do with your skill damage either. While on Berserk Ripping, it clearly says base damage. 60% of base damage. But here it doesn't have this wording. But yet it still doesn't work. So what is bugged? Like, I just feel like the 200 Sword Expertise is bugged because it just doesn't do anything.
Not apply Tyrio's Might and these kind of things. And I think Berserk Ripping working with these is just a bug. So that is like my take on this.
I think it's the opposite, playing the class for quite some hours. But yeah, I mean, this is like up to the developer. But it clearly says every direct damage, not skill, not anything specifically. And on here, it clearly says base damage. So those two, like 200 Sword just doesn't work at all.
At least, and it also just doesn't make sense. Like even if that was not a bug, it doesn't make sense because of what I just explained. Something like Tyrio's Might could be massively buffed. Something like the Rakanov Boots can be massively buffed. Something like Holy Bolts can be massively buffed if Gushing Wounds and or Berserk Ripping are actually tweaked to be reasonable. And then every class could use those items. Every class could try to make a build around Tyrio's Might, not just, Whirlwind Barb. So this is kind of the main problem that we have here, and this is kind of the main reason.
I think there was like after buffing Tyrell's Might, like there was like Druid builds that used this. There was also obviously a lot of Necromancer builds that used Holy Bolt with the pets.
Why Barbs are so ridiculously powerful. I think the 4 weapons could be addressed in other ways. A lot of people are always talking about that, and I think you just need to tweak the Barb numbers correctly, honestly. Like they have glyphs, they have legendary Paragon nodes, they have key passes.
He's definitely right on this part.
The tree,
Like, okay, Barb gets a lot of power from the 4 weapons. But that can already be like balanced in a way, right? By just making some of the generic stuff weaker, which they have started. I don't like really the approach by, like here, Blood Rage is a good example. Like they started like nerfing the Barb like in general with a lot of things here. And the Blood Rage cap, while I still don't like the way they kept it, because they basically just made everything beyond 300 berserking damage useless. I would much rather them having like, a soft cap rather than a hard cap. like where it reduces the scaling, like based on diminishing returns or something. But they definitely brought down the power level of the entire class a lot by adjusting and nerfing or capping these Paragon nodes.
Can tweak the tempers.
And I mean, that's obviously like a, one way to do it. And like, the barb, basically the unique class mechanic is that you can wield 4 weapons. Like at that point, if you remove it, then you might as well just remove like all the class mechanics in the first place. It just needs to be like balanced around that.
You can tweak the aspects that are barb specific. There are so
Definitely
many ways to like lower their overall power gain a little bit as they progress to even out the impact of those 4 weapons. It wouldn't be that hard to just like, take down the class specific aspects and lower the numbers. Like, why is that not happening? Why does an aspect like the Hoda aspect that gives like this AoE and the quake around it, why does it also have a damage number, for example? Like, it doesn't need it. Like, this is like just one of those examples where it's like...
I mean, but the thing is, like, Hoda is already not a strong build in comparison to, like, what you have also on other classes. Like, Hoda has been gathered divided by 10. I mean, but yeah, they could have basically, like, nerfed Hoda less and removed the multiplier from the legendary. But that's just, like, shifting the numbers.
Yeah, they just made these 4 weapon slots, but they also gave barbs just kind of like the same numbers on everything else. So of course that makes no sense. So this is like the 4 weapons topic, and then there's the Gushing Wounds topic, and I think both can be addressed fairly easily if you try a little bit. So this is like my message to the devs here. Alright, let's continue with some good news though. The third blade. Really cool item. I love playing with this. I made a death blow build that I think is going to be pretty good in Season 5. You can go check that out. I have a video on this. That is really something I'm looking forward to. However, it's kind of like just another Hoda and upheaval, so to say. So it doesn't really have like a huge distinction there. And it also doesn't...
I think we need multipliers for either Rupture or Steel Grasp. Like, especially Steel Grasp felt really weak. It just... I mean, if you just look at the skill, like, I think this doesn't do any damage. I think it has, like, what's the base here? Yeah, like 30% weapon damage. Like, you compare it to Deathblow, which is like 156. So, I mean, I think there needs to be like a 10x multiplier for Steel Grasp, so it can potentially be a build.
Doesn't really work that well for Rupture and Steel Grasp, so these are not really like big carries. Rupture kind of, at least for big AoE, it has some insane scaling in AoE because it multiplies its damage with the amount of targets it hits. So that's kind of wild. Then we have the Unbroken Chain, Kratos Barb. I guess a lot of people remember that build.
It has no damage.
Like a year ago in Season 0.
Unfortunately.
And a lot of people loved it. But it has not really ever been like that relevant again.
Yeah, it had more damage back in the days, and it still doesn't have no damage because ultimates, they don't even deal more damage than core skills, man. Look, like this Iron Maelstrom does 60%. Then it does 140, and then it does 30%. So if you average this out, that's like 140 plus 60 is like 200, 230 divided by 3. It's like 80% weapon damage or something per attack. I mean, you just compare it to some of the other numbers that we have, and it's like very similar. And this is an ultimate that has like a freaking long cooldown. So without any multipliers, without any ways to scale, this build just never does any damage.
At least outside of leveling, it was still really good for leveling, playing Walking Arsenal Barb, not necessarily with Iron Maelstrom. Now we have this item to try to make Iron Maelstrom good, but it's really bad, honestly.
Yes, so, it is.
Greatest Barb stuff.
It's like damage divided by 100 of any other spec.
Walking Arsenal is kind of down bad in general, thanks to, for example, stuff like this existing, but also like this item is just not good enough. It needs like some actual effect that scales the damage of Iron Maelstrom. That's supposed to be some kind of viable choice. Even in Hell Tides, it kind of works, but that's about it, basically.
It's kind of clunky, like switching the weapons and stuff.
Considering you have to sacrifice the Iron Mail slot and then play an entire build based around Iron Mail.
It also doesn't even have cooldown on it.
Yeah, that is really weak. So that's mostly like a meme thing. I will probably make a Kratos Barb anyway, just because it's fun and it's kind of good for Hell Tides and for leveling. So I might just make like a Hell Tide Kratos Barb and just park him somewhere and then farm my mats there whenever I want. So that is something, but that's about it here. And then we have basic attack builds in general. I just have it in Barb feedback now, but it's like a problem for all classes, I'd say. They made like basically an entire set of like Shard of Erafil, a new unique, Pain Gorgers, Lucian, the new unique, and then Starless. So some of these items have a downside, like it makes your basic attack cost resources, and then it costs even more, but then you don't really care because Starless Skies exists, and basic attacks generally don't have resource problems. They actually generate resources in many cases. So overall, basic attack is like the name of the game right now, and I do expect you're going to see some pretty heavy nerfs to a lot of these items. but also Blizzard has said they want to buff a lot of uniques, but I don't really see them buffing uniques to the level of being competitive with this sort of thing. Like, this is just too crazy. A lot of people say this.
This is like the kind of power level that we had with the pants here. Oh, I don't have them here. What is the name again? Talbot's Will pants. So this is like the kind of power level of Season 2 of Talbot's Will that they specifically didn't want with these new items. Shard of Rianthiel, Pain Gorgeous, Crown of Lycian, Starless Sky. This is going to be like auto-included in like 90% of builds. So it is like way too powerful. It's like super mandatory basically at this point.
And you're going to have the same like Bash meta, Flame meta, Heartseeker meta, and so on all of the classes. And yeah, it's nice to have viable basic skills, but I think it would be even nicer if we also had other viable skills and other viable builds. I mean, rogues do have that at least, and the Sorcs, but outside of that, not really all that many builds that are not like really, or the classes that are not dominated by these basic attacks. Maybe Necros, I guess, since they just have awful basic attacks. It definitely needs a bit of like a tweaking here. Also, Flay Duration Tempers, which extend the duration of the bleed, so you basically do more damage per Flay. Having that as a utility temper now, which previously was a weapon temper.
It's actually like another, basically, it's like kind of almost a buff, I guess. Problem is just you don't really have good weapon tempers, but it definitely doesn't make the build much weaker.
It doesn't make much sense that it buffs the bleed still. Like, I thought that it was probably just a bug in general because, for example, we have other cases of, let's say, Heartseeker duration on the rogue, and Heartseeker doesn't have any dot attached to it, so it only buffs the buff basically. Like,
yeah, but I feel like if you buff duration, like you have a bleed build, you buff duration. I mean, it should probably keep the same DPS, but obviously the duration goes up, right? I mean, I think that's like pretty intuitive that if you have longer Flay duration, like I say, instead of doing 100% weapon damage over 5 seconds, and then you double the duration, it should do basically 100% weapon damage over 5 seconds and another 100% weapon damage over 5 seconds. So 200% over 10 seconds, but the same DPS.
Like the extra
and that's the way it works right now. I think that part is definitely good because else Flay is just not even a viable skill.
And the extra crit damage and these kind of things.
Or this tempering is useless.
And that was a weapon temper that has now also become a utility temper. And Flay duration buffing the bleed was probably an oversight or a bug in the first place. And for some reason it has not been...
But like, why else would you want Flay duration? Like, I mean, if it literally like... So you're saying, rather than doing 100% weapon damage over 5 seconds, you're doing 100% weapon damage over 10 seconds. So you have less DPS if you get this bonus. So it's like a nerf to your build. I mean, there's no way, right? So you increase the duration, and rather than having the same DPS, it now goes down because you're doing the same damage just over 10 seconds rather than 5 seconds. So that's like a nerf. Why would you ever use this temper then?
Been changed, even though it has become utility temper now. So for some reason we have like one of the strongest tempers in the entire game that you can put on 6 different slots on your armor.
I mean, it's definitely too strong. I think they should give the Flay duration like the Bash treatment, like divided by 5 or something, like to begin with. And then on top of this, do something with Shard of Rianthiel. And bring Flay a bit down. Because, I mean, we were hitting for 500 billion. 500 billion on the PTR. And this is certainly not in line with any of the builds. Like here, this has been the DPS numbers with Flay on the PTR. And that is definitely a bit too crazy. You can see even just the regular bleeds here. 11 billion per second on Flay. And then you're rupturing this. And it just does 461 billion. So even if they divide this by 10, I mean, you're still hitting for 40 billions. I mean, that's still fine, right?
Basically.
So yeah, Flay was the best build, and it kept getting more and more buffs. So, it's even better now. And it's too crazy, 500 billion damage.
And you just buff Flay to the moon, and that will remain the true in Season 5 currently. So I'm not sure if that is intended, but it seems at the very least extremely odd that this didn't remain a weapon temper if that is intended. So I think that this Flay duration should not buff the bleed and only buff its buff effect, which would make it an actual utility temper and kind of a competitive option with other utility tempers instead of just being like the craziest thing you can put on any bar build, basically. So that's my 2 cents about this here. Double swing could need some love, especially pure double swing builds. It's basically only Twister, and that's it. I guess the same goes for Whirlwind.
Yeah.
And this is also some stuff.
Like, I keep saying this, man. For me, and to me, this description is as wrong as it can be. Read this. Core skills spend resource to deliver powerful attacks. In my opinion, they could rename this to be way more fitting into, instead of core skills, it should be support skills. You know, like this is like Whirlwind is a support skill, it gives you Fury. You see, we're playing Whirlwind build, we only put 1 point in this, we don't even take any of the upgrades because the DPS is completely irrelevant. Like we just use it to proc twisters, and we use it to get Fury, and we use it to move around. Hoda, same thing. It's been gutted and nerfed, like divided by 10 or something. We only use it in Bash for the 1.3 generic damage buff that buffs our Bash. Upheaval has basically never been played. Double Swing used to be like kind of okay in Season 1, but now we just use it either to keep to get Fury, to get Berserking, or to get Vulnerable, or to proc Twisters. And Rend is just ridiculous if you compare it to Flay. So yeah, Rend is like to extend Vulnerable and to get Fury, but it's not a DPS skill. Like, so none of these skills deal any damage, and they're certainly not powerful attacks. I feel much more that these are support skills at the moment. Like with the way the balance is going, like it just doesn't make sense, like, you know, to make a DPS build around them, because you just don't have any ways to scale it. Like basic skills, like way out DPS the core skills, like by a significant margin.
That I'd like to see tweaked in the future. I guess for now, Double Swing and Whirlwind work thanks to the Gushing Wounds shenanigans and the Twister shenanigans, but they don't really have any output on their own, so that needs to be addressed here. Alright, let's talk about
that was some good feedback. I will check maybe the other classes, but this is the video here from Woody. Well, definitely very heavy on the nerf Barb side of things. I mean, I definitely agree that Barb is overperforming. I also have it ranked on top in my tier list by a good margin. And I definitely agree with some of the points here where, like, Flay needs to come down and other builds need to come up. Especially, like, on the other classes here, like looking at Sorcerer and looking at some other things. But yeah, class balance is definitely going to be a big topic, guys. And we haven't seen the final patch note yet, so everything might change. And I'm really happy that a lot of creators make a lot of like these kind of feedback videos and send in written feedback to make the game and Season 5 the best it can be. We still have 4 weeks. Give your feedback, guys. Go to the PTR feedback forums and let the developers know your opinion, and try to be constructive and see what you would like them to change for the next season, so it can be the best it can be. Thanks for watching, my friends. GG. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, leave a like or a comment. I'm also live on Twitch almost every day, so come and say hi.